comment that you leave people's names out of your explanation so that we can keep the training mostly anonymous. Again, if you are just entering, please drop your name, your pronouns, your locations, any affiliation with CAT team in the chat, and mic off unless speaking. We will be using the stack in the chat for questions. So if you use the Zoom feature to raise your hand or put a little star in the chat, we'll know that you would like to speak. And there will be designated breaks, but as usual, if you need one, take one. And the chat will be monitored. So I know that sometimes there are conversations in the chat, comments and questions get lost. So we'll have someone just looking for those in relationship to our conversation and the session. And lastly, if we did not get to your question, please use our crowdsourcing document, which will be dropped into the chat. And if you have any ideas that didn't get brought up, you can feel free to put them in there. Yeah, and if there are any other things that I forgot that any other facilitators want to bring up, please name them.
Oh, if you want to send a comment anonymously, then send it to Cat 911 Neha in the chat. And if you are a facilitator for the small group and haven't done so yet, if you could please rename yourself to facilitator before your name.
Okay, so just briefly, I want to go over the agenda for the introduction. And then I'll go over another agenda later for each individual session. So today I'll be going through the intro, an introduction to the facilitators, the schedule for the day, and guidelines for the wellness room, the chat, which I had already mentioned, and more specific guidelines for the small breakout groups. So who are the facilitators? We are all part of CAT 911's rapid response sector. We are all based in different neighborhoods across Southern California and have different and varying backgrounds and experience with first response, mental health crises, de-escalation. We don't see ourselves as experts, but as facilitators of a shared space that honors collective knowledge and experience that everyone brings. So, you know, a lot of us just deal with these things in our everyday lives, and it's not necessarily our profession. We're not working for nonprofits to build up these responses. We're just all different types of people that are coming together. So what is CAT 911? It is a network of people, again, from various backgrounds and experiences across Southern California. And we have a network of CAT teams, and these teams operate as a resource to responding to community needs and as alternatives to 911. And a lot of these teams are at different places in their organizing. So some teams may have systems set up for communication or accountability, and other teams are reading resources together and are, you know, just talking about what they want to do together as a local or as a team. Our organized work is based on the framework of transformative justice, which aims to create a world where of mutual respect, interrelatedness, reciprocity, rather than violence, domination, and disposability. And if people want to learn more about transformative justice, if this is your first time hearing about it, or yeah, if you just want to get more acquainted, we can add some resources and links later on at the end of the presentation. We also want to emphasize that each sector and each neighborhood group organizes autonomously. So this isn't something that we are saying, this works well here, we're going to use it in another neighborhood or another place. It's all dependent on who is involved in each group and how they want to shape it. Skipped one. A little bit on the history of CAT 911. So CAT 911 came about after years of meetings at held by Youth Justice Coalition at Chico's Justice Center, where lots of people came together to discuss alternatives to 911. A lot of young people's families were impacted by law enforcement violence. A lot of community members were impacted by law enforcement violence. And in 2019, YGC held a conference. From that conference, a hub was created. And it was originally a 20-year dream that kind of moved a lot faster once the defund the police movement came about. And currently there's a rotating hub that's empowered to make decisions. There are local CAT teams and there are teams based on affinity group. And also people are encouraged to make their own teams. So really briefly, this is all on our website. So these are some of the current local groups, and there are also these sectors, and I won't go too deeply into them. I'll just let you all see them listed here and visit our website if you want to get involved in any of these in particular, or email us. We have a lot of contact info on the website as well about how to create your own. So our framework. And I think this is where a lot of our groups kind of share values despite being autonomous. Community health, wellness, and community care requires us to not only tear down cages and get rid of cops, but also to transform our relationship to one another. So we question not only law enforcement, but the hyper-professionalization of mental health that is supposed to be in the hands of experts, and yet does not respect the autonomy of those needing support. So we believe we all have the ability to intervene in crisis. And we're not presenting this as experts, but we're providing a space for shared learning and for collective knowledge. So we encourage you, there will be different places throughout the session where you will be able to share with one another, share on the crowdsource doc, share in the chat, and hopefully, yeah, we can all continue to build together. So why this particular training series? Many of us who are in the rapid response group took a mental health first aid training that actually wasn't abolitionist. So while we don't shame people for calling the cops, we also don't endorse or encourage reaching out to law enforcement and state agencies that further harm and entrench our loved ones in violence and isolation. And after attending that series, we realized amongst our group, we had a lot of knowledge, we had a lot of skills, and we wanted to host a series ourselves and see who else would be interested and who else would want to build in similar ways. So this is our schedule for the day. We have our introductions, which I'll be wrapping up right now. And then we'll move into harm reduction and substance use. That should say use, not abuse. And we'll have a break from 2:30 to 2:45. We'll go into our second session about when law enforcement arrives. We'll have another break, and then we'll have the second part of our second session, and we'll close off with a grounding exercise. So some final things I wanted to share with you all. Guidelines for entering the wellness room. So we do have a decompression room available to those who might need some space away from the training and might need a space to talk to someone, to do some grounding exercises, to just be. We'll be addressing some heavy things as far as violence, state interaction with state agencies, and things that many of you have probably experienced. So in order to enter that decompression wellness room, please direct message CAT 911 in the chat. So and then you'll receive a set of instructions on how to enter that decompression room and how to leave when you need to. And those rooms will be facilitated. So there will be someone there to hold space for you. And this is the very last thing that I will share as part of our introduction is the crowdsourced document. So this document is available to you for logistical questions, for resources, to share feedback with us or with other participants. It's a space that can function as a seed bank for thoughts or ideas that you didn't get to share out loud. Yeah, and so the link will be shared in the chat. If you missed it now, it'll probably be dropped in the chat later on as well. And we encourage you to use this document, and it'll be available to you afterwards, as will the slides and the video recording of the presentation. So I think that concludes the introduction. Thank you all for your time, and I'm excited to get into our next session.
Okay, I'm going to start sharing the screen so we can get started.
It looks like Ruby has a question before you get started.
Ruby, did you have a question?
Oh, sorry about that. I think I must have done that on accident. AMJ, thanks for acknowledging me, and I apologize for that.
No worries.
Okay, great. So my name is Sage. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm part of the CAT 911 Echo Park team, and I will be co-facilitating today, just the first part of the training.
Hey everyone, I'm Annie. My pronouns are they or she, and I will be co-facilitating with Sage, although I have to jump right into for another meeting. So yeah, in advance, thank you all. This is a really wonderful space, and I'm grateful to be sharing it with you.
And just a comment that like this training is called like harm reduction / substance use, but today we will be focusing specifically on naloxone and opioid use. So harm reduction is a super expansive topic, and just for the sake of time, and so we can like really jump into details, we're only going to be focusing on those things today.
Cool. So just really quick, our agenda. So we're going to spend 40 minutes on a presentation. Then we're going to jump to breakout groups where we can kind of talk more closely and get to know one another and have discussion. And then we'll wrap up with questions in the full group.
And so in this training today, we're hoping that you all will leave with a greater understanding of the political and social significance of naloxone as a technology of solidarity, that you'll be able to identify an overdose, understand the steps and how to proceed in an overdose situations, and then also how to administer naloxone with the overall goal of just increasing your confidence and how comfortable you are with naloxone.
Oh, tired.
I feel that.
At least my eyes were real.
So I'm going to start off with just giving us a brief history of naloxone and sort of understanding that when we talk about harm reduction and substance use, in particular opioids, there's a deep history of criminalization, and that is like a deeply racialized history. So we're just going to talk a little bit about that context. So before naloxone, which is like also called Narcan, we'll probably use it interchangeably. So before naloxone or Narcan, there was Naline. And Naline was only available in a hospital setting, and as a result of that, used as a tool of surveillance and social control by the police, who would basically use like who was getting Naline as a way to detect who was using narcotics and then criminalize those people. And that, you know, meant a large degree of incarceration. Naline also as a drug itself, or like as a medicine itself, it immediately induced really intense withdrawal. So it's very, very painful and intense to use for people who are dependent on narcotics. So as a result of that, people really stayed away from it. They associated it with this really, really intense withdrawal, which sort of served as a punishment for using. And also because Naline was so heavily associated with surveillance and criminalization and policing. So this Naline, which could have saved many, many more lives than it did, a lot of people learned to stay away from it.
So why is naloxone so important? Going off of that history that Annie shared with us, naloxone being available outside of the carceral and institutional settings means that people dependent on opioids can use it without fear of surveillance or punishment. And because you can be just anybody, like anyone can carry it in their pocket on the street. And so the access to it means that more people are kept alive and have the opportunity to actually have access to this life-saving medicine. And so knowing how to recognize an overdose and administer naloxone are really profound acts of love and care for our community. So within the context of an empire that seeks to banish people into different institutions while also socializing us and training us to look away from people when they are in dangerous situations and allow them to be pushed to the fringes of society, equipping ourselves with this knowledge means that we can be there for people and see them and really hold them in whatever context they're currently in. And so it's a way of bringing us together in a struggle that wishes many of us dead. So that as just a technology of solidarity and of just an amazing tool you can bring when you're as a neighbor, as a community member, and just as a person. Did you have anything else on that?
No, that was beautiful. Yeah, so really drawing from that addiction from an abolitionist perspective, we recognize that dependency on narcotics is neither a crime nor a moral failing, but a response to a society that devalues human life, exacerbates human suffering and immiseration, and encourages us to pay for escape from pain rather than fight the conditions that caused it. So yeah, this is just, we love drug users. We don't criminalize them. We don't judge them. We recognize that we're all struggling to cope with the pain of living in this world. And yeah, drug use is one of the ways to cope with that.
Yeah, and so we don't consider anyone in our community disposable at all. And I think just that as a sentence is like incredibly powerful because like we were talking about, like capitalism, colonialism is all about disposing of people. And this as a practice is in direct opposition to that. And so we're seeking to build power with our community through naloxone in building networks of support and care outside of capitalism as a way to fight capitalism. So even this training in an effort to share this information is about building up that network and ensuring that as many of us as possible are able to share this knowledge, have this knowledge, and intervene in situations where it could be useful. Oops.
Okay, cool. So now we're going to transition into looking at more of the practical, like material part of this. So we're going to talk a little bit about the legal frameworks we're working in, and then like how to use Narcan. So the first thing is these are the two California laws to just be aware of. Good Samaritan Law, AB 472. This provides limited protection from arrest, charge, and prosecution for low-level drug violations for people who seek emergency medical assistance at the scene of a suspected drug overdose. So essentially, this is offering, like, if people seek medical attention, that is not going to come with criminalization. Then the second is Overdose and Treatment Liability Act, AB 635. This allows for the prescription and distribution to friends, family, and other persons who can assist those at risk of overdose. So that allows people to possess and administer Narcan in emergency. So this is basically the law that enables all of us to access Narcan and to administer it.
Yeah, and just to note that some of you are calling in from outside of California, so you might have laws that are different than this or similar. So just that this training was created LA specific in that regard, but everything else is applicable to outside of California. So what are opioids? On the right, we have a list of some examples of opioids, and then just as a little recap, opioids are a type of drug from opium poppy, and they slow down the central nervous system, including your breathing. And so in the next slide, we're going to go over exactly what happens to your body. And there are different ways to consume opioids. They can be smoked, injected, or swallowed. And at the bottom of the list of examples, we have fentanyl highlighted. And that's because fentanyl has invaded the drug market, and it's extremely lethal and extremely dangerous because it's getting cut into drugs that aren't opioids. So we're going to go over more what that means later. But just to highlight that as like something to hold on to, and we'll circle back.
So here are the steps of what physically happens in an opioid overdose. So the first thing is slow breathing, and then breathing stops. That lack of oxygen may cause brain damage, so time is really of the essence. Heart stops, and then the last potential step is death, a fatal episode. So yeah, as this indicates, this can happen really quickly, and in particular with something like fentanyl, yeah, it can happen really quickly.
So these are just some signs of an opioid overdose. So further down in the training, we're going to talk about identifying an opioid overdose and how to react and intervene. And so this is just kind of getting us ready for that part of the conversation. And so since we know that opioids impact our breathing, you might notice someone has more shallow breathing, or they're making some sort of like choking or gurgling sound, or not breathing at all. And because the breathing is impacted, we're going to see discolorization on their mouth or fingertips. So with lighter skin, that might be more of a bluish tint. And then with darker skin, that's going to be more of a silvery tint. But you also might see blue or purple or ashen gray. And then because, as Annie said, like an overdose can result in death. And so at a certain point in the timeline of an overdose, someone can become not responsive or completely unconscious.
So for fentanyl specifically, as you can see in this photo, a tiny amount of fentanyl can be lethal. So again, like time is of the essence, and some of these symptoms on the side are specifically of a fentanyl overdose. So wooden chest, a quote standing seizure. So essentially the chin drops down tight and the arms bend up from the elbow with wrists flexed down. And I think we're going to cover this later in the training, but a good thing to remember is that Narcan, no amount of it it's not harmful if you're on a drug that is not an opioid. It only works for opioids. But if you suspect that someone is overdosing, you can give them Narcan and it will not harm them. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, and Annie mentioned it that, well, first of all, it's a tiny amount of fentanyl that is lethal. And then also the speed that which it causes an overdose is just so much fat. Like with heroin, it takes about 1 to 2 hours for someone to overdose, but with fentanyl, it can be a couple of minutes. So throughout this training, just like remembering that time is really of the essence, and acting in a situation is really important.
Sage, before you continue, would you mind explaining what is a wooden chest?
For sure. My understanding of wooden chest, and Annie, you can jump in if I'm wrong, is that it's like the chest kind of like puffs out and is like very out and like straight and firm in a very like unusual way. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, and it's like it's like your diaphragm gets really rigid. So this whole area just like is, yeah, it, like Sage said, it just looks very like unnatural, because it's like this whole strip right here is just like very firm.
We can't see what you're referring to in terms of strip right here because we're looking at the screen share.
Thank you, AJ. So sorry about that. Yeah, so I was gesturing basically from the bottom of my chin to like where my ribs are.
Thank you. And there's another question, a hand raise.
That's me. I just had a question just because like I've attended a lot of trainings like this and like a lot of like overdose, different types of overdoses, like there's mention of symptoms that are different types of like that look like different types of seizures. And so like I'm epileptic and I'm wondering like if I walk in and somebody's having like a seizure like symptom, how am I going to know the difference between, oh, that's overdose, I should respond for overdose specific responses, or oh, that's a seizure, I should respond with seizure specific responses.
I can respond. I don't have a great answer for that, except for context clues, which are typically like it's, you know, if you know that this person is a drug use, like I think one of the things that's important to remember is it's most likely that you're not going to be like driving around and encounter a stranger. It's part of the way that this training works is like hopefully equipping everyone to be able to train other people, so that it's like making sure that the Narcan gets to people who know people who use or people who do use themselves. So I don't know if like, you know, we could compare next to each other like what the precise differences are, but I think that context clues are usually what help out with that. I don't know, Sage, if you might know a little bit more specifics.
Yeah, I think first, just thanks for uplifting that question. And then I think Annie pointing out context clues is a really good, like that's pretty much what I was going to say, just in terms of.
Are eye movements similar in both cases?
I think it could really vary depending on like the person and the body and the context. So I'm gonna say I don't know, possibly.
Can I say something? Hi, this is Fung. Hi, so in the, I go by she, her. I am actually an emergency room pharmacist. So for seizures, if someone's experiencing, there's like multiple types of seizures that can happen. And I feel like, yes, use the context clues in case of someone experiencing an overdose seizures, but in terms of and administer the Narcan, if you're gonna have to decide, oh, this might be an opioid overdose, or the Narcan won't, like, it won't do anything to the person having a seizure that's not an OD.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and so, but if someone's experiencing a seizure, you may need to call 911 because that chronic, I don't know how to say it, that seizuring experience in the brain and body needs to be medicated ASAP. So either way, having a seizure is like, and I'm talking to someone who have more experience, you yourself should be treated. So if you're going to administer the Narcan, if you have to second guess, from my perspective, just administer it. And then
okay, yeah, that was my
deal with the seizure.
question, because like I have like, you know, I get like status epileptica, and so I have to go to the hospital because if I keep like, because otherwise my brain's just gonna keep seizing and I'm gonna die.
Yeah.
So I'm like not sure, you know what I'm saying? Like ethics wise, when I should do that or when I should not.
Yeah, so with the Narcan, I would, if you're gonna think this might be a possible OD, you should administer the Narcan. But if you're seeing someone seizing anyways, they should get medical help stat, because you don't want their brain to fry out, right? So
Okay.
I
right.
hope that helps. I don't know.
It was mostly like an ethics concern because I was like, okay, well, because I wasn't sure if like when we're talking about standing seizures, that's going to be something that like stops quickly, and so I wouldn't want to call 911 if that's just going to make, you know, more problems for people. But I also don't want to not call 911 if this person's brain is going to run out of oxygen otherwise. You know what I'm saying?
So yeah, for me personally, if I see someone seizing, that is like a medical emergency. So I know this is like an abolitionist, like non, and you know, like we don't want the police to intervene, and that's a problem with our public health is you have to call 911. Sometimes the police comes, and sometimes it's just the ambulance that comes. So from my perspective, ethically, like I don't know, that's a hard one. I would want an ambulance stat. He needs an Ativan shot. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, and just
Right. Okay.
that's a
Thank you.
tough one. That's a tough one. You guys have more experience in the street. I have more experience in the hospital, so maybe you can speak better to it. Yeah.
So later on,
Fire department. Okay. Thank you.
we'll go over, you know, if even after you Narcan someone, they're going to need more assistance. So either getting them to a safe place or a hospital, but we don't encourage folks to call 911, and we have folks call their local fire department. But that's like later in the training.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, thank
We
you.
have someone named Isaac with their hand up.
Hey y'all, so some folks in the chat were talking about expiration dates, and I was wondering if you could address that at some point.
Yeah, it was my understanding that, well, I just think that all expiration dates are fake. But the ones in LA that the county's giving out usually have an expiration date of about a year. And within that time frame, they're safe within a couple months post that. But you can always go to certain sites around the city and exchange for non-expired Narcan. And definitely recommend you having non-expired Narcan on you, but yeah, hope that answers the question. Okay. So we'll keep going now, and there'll be more time for questions later, and then also in small groups, so just so everyone knows. So Narcan naloxone is an opioid blocker, and it reverses the opioid overdose. And we have the next slide will show like a diagram of what that means. And there's a lot of misconceptions that Narcan has side effects, but there are absolutely no side effects. It doesn't get a person high. It's not addictive. And there are two types. So there is an intranasal type and then an intramuscularly type of Narcan. And that just means you can either inject them or put it through your nose. And so the one pictured is the one that you put in someone's nose, and that's the one we're going to be showing you later. What's really important to know about Narcan is that it stays in the system for 30 to 90 minutes. And that's really important to know because if someone regains consciousness after you've given them Narcan and they choose to leave, you really want to let them know that the Narcan's still in their system, which means it's increasing the chances that if they use, they're going to overdose again. So you really want to let them know that, again, it's their choice if they want to leave, but making sure that they understand like what using within that time frame would do. It's really common for folks in the ER to see the same person return with a new overdose within the same day because the Narcan is still in the system. And then just again to stress, there's absolutely no side effects. And when you're storing it, keep it out of the sunlight and don't put it in the refrigerator. But aside from that, it's really easy to keep around.
Yeah, so quickly here a visual on precisely how Narcan works. So it blocks opioids from connecting with receptors in the brain, and that is what reverses the opioid overdose. So essentially visualized here, you can see the receptors in the brain, and basically the orange ball here, naloxone, fills in those receptors and pushes out or blocks the opioid from attaching. And so, like Sage said, this is like a temporary effect. So it's really important that that person seeks medical care in order to ensure that the overdose doesn't reverse.
So Narcan only works on opioids, and to the left we have a list of drugs that are not opioids, and then understanding that because fentanyl is being cut into a lot of different stimulants and pills, even if someone is unresponsive, even if they weren't taking an opioid, we suggest using the Narcan, and that's because of fentanyl being found in a bunch of different drugs. So really this rule / suggestion is like, if in doubt and you know someone is using, use the naloxone. There are no negative side effects.
So these are some prevention strategies to help share with folks who you know who might be using to help reduce risk for overdose. So the first is just using a small amount each time taking the drug, sort of like a taste test. As we saw with fentanyl, a really small amount, it can be lethal. So this really depends on what you're using. If you're using, leave Narcan out somewhere visible, somewhere nearby, so that, you know, if overdose happens, someone near you or yourself can administer it. If mixing drugs, pay attention to what you're mixing in order to make sure that, you know, things aren't combining in a way that will make them more lethal or more harmful. And let people know, especially if, you know, you're using in a space that you share with other people, let people know that it's okay to Narcan you if you don't wake up. Similarly, if you use alone, ask someone to like knock on your door in X minutes, just giving yourself basically some safeties there so that folks will know to check in on you, and also that it's okay to check in on you. Yeah.
And so now the rest of the training, we're gonna go over steps of an overdose response. So the first of that will be assessing whether or not you are dealing with an overdose. And then the second will be using the naloxone. And then the third will be calling your local fire department.
So the first is assess, is this an overdose? And the first thing that we just want to make sure that we're grounding in is when we engage with other people, we should not be projecting ideas about what is quote unquote normal, about, you know, what is a normal body. So we're not projecting those ideas about ability onto people. And our work and choices need to be grounded in respect and consent. So part of assessing is both, is it an overdose, and also, you know, making sure to engage in a way that is respectful and that is grounded in consent. So the first thing is notice something is off. And again, not projecting our ideas about what bodies should look like onto that noticing. And the second and third, I think, parts of this can help you make that assessment. So if they look unconscious, can you wake them? So the first sort of part of that, and each of these is an escalation to sort of like, you know, more and more assess what's going on. So can you wake them? First, talk to them at a regular volume, just ask if they're okay, like you would ask anyone. And then if they don't respond, talk a little more loudly into their, of course, we're in COVID time, so not too closely, but as safely as you can, speak loudly, ask, can you hear my voice? And again, acknowledging that some people may be hard of hearing or unable to hear or truly unconscious. So you can proceed to the next step if you don't hear, if they're not responding to verbal cues. So then third, do they respond to physical cues? And again, this is situational and wanting to be mindful of people's boundaries. So shaking someone's knee is a really good and non-invasive way to see if someone's responding to physical stimuli. A couple of others are the sternal rub. So I know you can't see me, but your sternum, like right in the middle of your chest, that like hard bit there, rubbing there, and then tugging an earlobe. Those second two are obviously like more of an escalation of touch. So that's definitely, this is sort of like your last perimeter, assessing like whether or not this is dangerous and whether or not we need to take action.
I was muted, sorry. Dealing with the naloxone. I didn't realize y'all wouldn't be able to see us. Is that true? You can't see us? We're not visible while we're sharing the screen?
You should be able to see because you're pinpointed.
Okay, they say we're visible. Okay, cool. Thank you. So we'll go on with how I was going to do it. So you're going to want to take the naloxone out of the package. They come in these boxes. And so you're just going to take it out. And inside each box, we have 2 doses. It's 1 dose per Narcan little canister. And so you want to take it out of the canister. You won't need these instructions after this training, hopefully. And the Narcan is kind of made to be held. So you want to just put 2 fingers here and then your thumb on this little plunger. And you don't want to test it out. There's only 1 dose per canister. So just once you're in the situation and you're going to use it, just use it. So you're going to take it and then just, as you can see in the photo, like insert it in their nose and plunge. And then a really important part of this process is waiting a full 2 minutes. So in thinking about a context where you're going to be using naloxone, either having a friend or a bystander take proper time. So bring out like a stopwatch and record a full 2 minutes, or if you're alone, having to do that yourself. And that's just to ensure that the naloxone is actually setting into the person's system. And so if they don't wake up after that first dose, then you can do another one. And so because everyone's bodies are different and the context in which someone might be using is different, it might take more than one. I've had someone tell me that it's taken them up to 6 doses for someone to regain consciousness. So in thinking about being prepared in these situations, like having on your person or your outreach kit, like at least 2. And yeah, but understanding that you might need to use more. And so after you've done that and someone is regaining consciousness, putting them into the recovery position. So if you've ever slept on your side in a fetal position, that's basically what the recovery position is. And that's to ensure, like, as someone's coming to, if they vomit, they won't choke on that. Yeah. And then also, like, as someone is coming to, like, we're going to start like talking to them. And so definitely letting them know your name, letting them know how many times you administered naloxone, and then just that they're safe. And if there's a crowd gathering, like trying to keep them back it's going to be a really jarring experience to come back like this. And just to note that there are no side effects of naloxone, but it can send someone into withdrawals. So someone might be extremely uncomfortable and agitated. And so just prepping yourself to navigate a situation where if you're engaging with a stranger, like they don't know you. So trying to be really calm and comforting in this situation.
A hand raised by Ziggy, but before that, I just want to address a comment and a question that was in the chat. A comment was, it seems like some more seizure-specific info, especially considering there are partial seizures and total seizures, and status epileptica would be helpful in the future. And then a question is, just a quick question before we get to Ziggy. Do we wait 2 minutes between each Narcan dose?
First, to the seizure-specific information, I totally agree. I'm not a medical professional. I'm just here as someone with family members who use drugs and wanting to like expand everyone's collective knowledge of naloxone. So I definitely could use more information that it is seizure specific and think that the training would benefit from it. So if you are that person, that'd be great to like send it along to us so we can change the training. And then yes, it's a full 2 minutes between each dose of naloxone.
Vicky, do you still have a question?
That was my question. If it was waiting full 2 minutes between each dose, and also if anyone else had some more seizure-specific information to help, like figure out like which I'm responding to, because I know how to respond to the latter, but you know what I'm saying? But that's just it. That's just it.
We will be breaking off into small groups in like one slide. So hopefully if folks have that information, we can crowd source it and share it together there. And like when we come back to the big group, be able to share it amongst everyone.
Could I just pop in for a second? Because I think from Audrey, she heard there was a question regarding whether Narcan, like people develop like an immunity to it, or if it becomes less effective over time.
I've never heard, that's a really good question. I've never heard of anything like that happening, or information around that existing. I might be wrong. So if there are like people with more information around that, please speak up or drop it in the chat. My understanding of the needing different doses is just that our bodies are different. The amount of drugs in our bodies might be at higher levels, or yeah, it's just different. But no, I don't think we work up an immunity.
Sorry, I forgot to say this is empty. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, can I speak to that?
Yes, of course.
Hi, this is Fung again. You know, I've never read or seen any study that hasn't been reported that you build up a tolerance because it is an antagonist to the receptor. It goes away, you know. The drug only lasts so much, so that I'm just trying to say it not scientifically, that up titration is not something that occurs. It's only like your body requires more Narcan depending on how severe your overdose. But I haven't seen reports or heard of any studies that said that, if that makes sense.
Great, thank you for jumping in. And then I see in the chat that someone was wondering if when administering naloxone, if someone should be in a particular position. They don't have to be. They can, like they might be sitting in a chair and slumped over, or they might be on the ground. It's really whatever is easiest. People's bodies might have a different reaction to it, so it would probably be safest to have them on the ground just in case they fall or they move, just to avoid like someone hitting their head anything like that, but it works in all positions. Okay, and then the final step in dealing with an overdose situation is after you've administered the naloxone and you've communicated with the person who experienced the overdose, they are going to need more medical attention, or at least go to a safer place. I would recommend they need more medical attention. And because this is an abolitionist training, we're going to recommend not calling the cops. I don't know if this is applicable outside of Los Angeles, but in LA, you can call your nearest fire department and ask for them to send a paramedic or an ambulance. And that's a way to avoid having the cops come on the scene. And it's a way to just, cut them out of the picture altogether. When you do this, when you're speaking with the emergency operator, you're going to want to explain that you found someone not breathing or unconscious, give them the location, let them know how many times you administered Narcan, and then wait with the person until the fire department shows up. And we're gonna, in the next training of if cops show up, they're gonna go over like how to speak with cops on the scene and stuff like that. And the same is applicable to the local fire department. We want to be thinking about people's our proximity and vulnerability with law enforcement of any kind and just the systems of any kind. So you really don't have to give them a lot of information. You don't need to say someone was using drugs. You don't need to say there are drugs on the scene. You can just go with like a very baseline, like someone was unconscious, I gave them Narcan, they're coming to, we need more help. And that's fine. They'll still send out the ambulance. So always when talking with the fire department or authorities, less is safer because we don't want to implicate anyone. And then especially like waiting with them, wait with them to make sure that they're okay. And then this is, if they have regained consciousness, talk with them. They might not want to go, they might not want to engage with the fire department at all. They might not want to go to the hospital. That's their choice. You've already done what you could do. From there, it's their body and we have to let them do what they want to do. I see a raised hand.
Yeah, there's a raised hand and there's a question. So we could do the raised hand first and then I'll ask the question.
Okay, cool.
Hi, my name's Nana Atakrapipati. Use he, him pronouns. And it's a really simple question. Sorry, I don't live in California. So I was just wondering, do you have different numbers for your fire department and your police? Or is it that just you call 911 and you specifically ask for fire department?
It's that one that we call 911 and you would specifically ask for the fire department. But even then, they can choose to dispatch a police even if you didn't request it. And so what we've done here is, since this training was created by people in the Echo Park Cat 911, there's a fire department really close to a primal part of our neighborhood. And so a primary part of our neighborhood. And so that's the number we put down. And then it gets complicated because fire departments have different different jurisdictions in different areas. So knowing where you are in the city might have a different number than, like where you work might have a different number than where you live. And so understanding that, and you might have to like Google it to figure it out because they do have unique fire station numbers.
All right, thank you so much.
So we have a question. Letting the operator know how many times you administered Narcan, would you not want to call immediately after administering it the first time to make sure that the medical personnel can show up as soon as possible?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great question. And this does make it seem like it's out of order. I'd say you should call them some people would even call them as you're administering it. So throughout the process, you're on the phone with someone and talking through what's going on. Definitely calling them as soon as possible. This would be easier if you're working in a team, because then you can regulate roles. So it's like, if I'm going to be the person administering Narcan, my friend is going to be taking time. My other friend is going to be calling the local fire department, and my other friend is going to like get towels or something, you know? So yeah, definitely call them as soon as possible. And then one more question, and then we're going to go in a breakout room. So I think it's Ty.
Hi, yeah. I'm Ty, he, him, his, and I just have a quick question that I put in the chat. But what do you do if you call and then the ambulance is coming, you administered Narcan, and then the person becomes conscious and then tells you that they don't want to deal with the ambulance or the fire department? What do you do then?
Yeah, great question. Then you can offer to help them leave the area, or they can just choose to leave, and then the if they choose to leave, and you've already called the ambulance, I would just wait for the ambulance or give them another call and say, never mind, we don't need it anymore, or they don't want to go to the hospital. That's a really good question. We do have to follow whatever the person wants. Okay, so now we're going to go into small groups for a little bit less than 15 minutes. These small groups some of them will have a facilitator, and then all of them will have a scenario that you can talk through with your group, and then some questions to go over. And so we'll do that and then come back. Excuse me, I have an air bubble. We'll come back to the larger group. And then if we have any questions, we'll share them out together. Other folks can speak up if they have the answer, and then we'll go on break before the second training.
I don't know who was talking from my group, but I was saying the CPR shields are not COVID protective, but any other time, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
We also didn't finish in my group, but also you can administer CPR without doing the mouth to mouth. You can do just chest compressions. And it sounds like there's a lot of stuff where a street medic training, like even basics, it wouldn't be the full rundown, but would make people feel a little bit more comfortable not immediately calling 911, which can be a really big harm reduction factor.
Mm-hmm. That's coming.
Thanks, AMJ, you got it.
Any other questions from the groups? Or comments, or I saw in the chat someone said, does fentanyl have the same effects in a different drug that's not an opioid? And the answer is yes. Fentanyl is being cut into drugs. And so because fentanyl is an opioid, it's causing people to have a higher chance of overdosing. And it also means that even if you're taking a drug and you think it's an opioid with fentanyl in there, Narcan will work in that circumstance. I I see Anne Meredith has her hand raised. Did you have a question?
Hey, loves. How y'all doing? My name's Ann Meredith. You, she, her, and hers from New Orleans, Louisiana. So we were just starting to check in this and then wanted to honor that y'all addressed this part right when we came back, but the piece in terms of rescue breaths. And so how, like, are there other parts where we're gonna dive in deeper to that, the harm reduction of like, you know, like if y'all are in a pod together, if this is your partner, right? Like, yes, I'm doing rescue breaths, like while I'm getting the Narcan out, or like asking my friend to get the Narcan out while I'm doing the rescue breaths. If this is someone that's like not in the house, or like, however, is there like somebody else that can either be accessed, right? So that the rescue breaths can come. And if it's someone who there's not that deep relationship already and trust, conversations about like harm reduction and risk and folk making decisions about how to navigate that. Just, are y'all gonna be diving deeper into some resources about that later in the piece?
That's a great question. In this first training today, we're not, just because of time, but we will be having a different street medic training, I think soon. I don't know the exact date, but they'll be covering more of that. And it was really just a time piece with today to fit all the trainings in, yeah. Any other questions or comments, or are folks ready to get on break? Cool. Well, if any questions come up later, drop them in the chat. You have our email. Please keep like sharing all the information you all had. Definitely this training has gaps and we're excited to expand it and improve it. So thank you for people who asked questions or who highlighted where information was needed. Really appreciate it. We're gonna take a 15-minute break now. So that brings us back at 2:48, and then we're gonna jump into the next training. So thanks everyone for participating, and we'll see you in 15.
Hi, welcome back everyone. Is everyone able to see the presentation? Cool, okay. Okay, great. And thank you all for your patience. It's my first time in the Zoom abyss in such a massive way. So yeah, I really appreciate everyone kind of going with this flow. So welcome back to part 2 of our rapid response training. We're going to get into when the cops arrive. As we've noticed in a lot of the previous day's presentations, a lot of questions have come up around, you know, what happens when law enforcement shows up, or how to separate medical, you know, an ambulance first responding versus, you know, the cops showing up and things like that. So hopefully we will cover some of that today. So again, you know, same community guidelines for participation. We are recording. If you don't want to be on camera or you don't want your face recorded, make sure to turn off your camera when you're speaking. We'll have sections for breaks and questions. Mic off unless you're speaking. And yeah, feel free to use the crowdsourced document for any lingering ideas or questions. So I'll just briefly go through the agenda. We'll do a little intro. We'll have a check-in question, go over some abolitionist principles. We'll do part 1, if cops show up. We'll have another break. We'll do if cops show up part 2. We'll end with another breakout session similar to the last one, and we'll have a little debrief and share out before we close. So I know we're coming back from having gone through the Narcan training, and a lot of these trainings have been pretty heavy, and our focus has been constrained by the current systems that we live under. But I wanted to propose a check-in question where the police have been abolished. What are the sights, sounds, sensations, feelings, or imaginings of a future free from law enforcement policing? And you can go ahead and drop your description in the chat, and we'll shout out some of the answers as they come up. Neighbors knowing each other and checking in to make sure everyone's got what they need. Very cool. Compassionate communication being the norm with communities. A sense of collective responsibility. I love that. Mental health is not criminalized. Sound of nothing. That's the sound of, of the police. Amazing. Places to walk into, places to call for help with fully compassionate care. No helicopters. Yeah, I can, you're in LA, right? And if it's difficult for you to type in the chat and you want to just shout out or say what you think, feel free to unmute yourself for the next few minutes and just shout it out. Courage to do what is just without fear of punishment. Amazing. Oh my God, trying to explain to our kids what the cops were. Oh my God. Beautiful. Oh my God. Thank you all. Maybe a few more and we'll definitely keep these in the crowdsourced stock. This is like, I feel like we're writing a poem.
Yeah, this question is awesome.
Thank you. Oh my God. And we're all doing it. We're all building it together right now, which is so cool. Okay, thank you all. I think we're gonna continue to keep people's answers in our crowdsourced stock. Yeah, really, really appreciate hearing from everyone's amazing imagination. Wow. Okay, we're gonna get into a little bit about myself and Leah, and I'll let Leah go first.
Okay, I think I'm off mute now, right? Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Leah. I use she, her pronouns. I organize with the CAT 911 San Gabriel Valley group, and I also am a lawyer. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm excited to, like talk to you a little bit more about what to do if the cops show up, but I'm also excited to like learn from you all and hear from you about, you know, what your experiences are and what your collective knowledge is. And I'm a Cancer, so I've got the little Cancer symbol right there, crab.
Awesome.
You got heart. Leah, you got heart.
Thank you.
Shabina, if you're talking, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Thank you for catching that. I'm so excited to be presenting with Leah in the process of putting this presentation together. I've learned so much. And also shout out to Sage, Annie, and everyone else who, all the participants that contributed in the last session. I learned so much, and I feel like we've been getting such great feedback already about how helpful that last training was. So I hope we can just continue to keep building. And a little bit about myself. I'm part of the mental health rapid response sector, and have been organizing for the past decade or so, and was born and raised here on Tongva land in Los Angeles. So a little bit about the objectives for today. We're going to try our best to prepare each other for interactions with police while providing crisis support. Again, ideally, and this is ideally in your community, we're going to try and prepare people to use their legal protections and use their legal rights. And lastly, we're going to try to learn and practice police de-escalation strategies. So similar to the last workshop and the overall series, we're not experts. We're not, we don't believe in the hyper-professionalization of, care and health work, and believe that we are all capable of intervening in crisis and even in de-escalating one another, and helping support de-escalation in different crisis situations. A little bit more about the expectations about this particular training. So because of time constraints, we are only focusing on skill building and skill sharing. And this training is geared towards people who are in community action teams or organized rapid response settings, and those interested in joining or forming one. So ideally, this was sort of based off of our CAT teams and our CAT sectors, where people are getting organized and designating roles and like thinking through a lot of the questions that will come up today. And maybe you're already doing that outside of a CAT team or wherever you're located. Maybe you've participated in organized response. And we'd love to, hear from everybody about their experiences. But you'll see that when we go through the next set of slides and the scenarios, that everything is sort of geared towards having organized, collective, or team responses. And for further history on policing and Cop Watch, we have a few links that we're going to share in the chat and recommendations. There's a good presentation on the road to abolition put together by Mariam Kaba. There's a toolkit on abolishing policing, which also includes the history of policing, which is pretty thorough, and Critical Resistance has put that on their website. So that will be shared in the chat and again at the end of the presentation. And now I'm going to pass it to Ezra, who will lead us through an EFT exercise.
Thanks, Shabina. Hi, everyone. My name is Ezra, and I will be demonstrating an EFT exercise with you all. So a little bit about EFT is that it stands for Emotional Freedom Technique, and it's an alternative treatment for physical pain and emotional distress. And it's kind of similar to acupuncture in that it focuses, sorry, hold on, my belt is like really, really tight right now. Okay, sorry about that. But it's kind of similar to acupuncture in that like it focuses on the meridian points or like the energy hotspots to restore the balance of your body's energy. And it's been used to treat PTSD and anxiety, and just kind of helps to calm down the nervous system. So, sorry. Okay, we'll be using our hands to lightly tap on specific acupressure points on our bodies. And as we're tapping, you can name your emotions and speak affirmations to yourself that could be themed in self-acceptance or just admitting what feelings are present. So you can use one hand or you can use both hands. It doesn't matter which hand you use. So if you're able to, I welcome you to join me in this exercise. Make my screen a little bit bigger. Okay. So first we're going to start off by the edge of our hands, and we're going to get all 4 fingers and then just lightly tap on the edge of the hand. And then we're going to move on to the other hand and do the same. And as you're doing this, you can allow yourself to breathe at a comfortable pace. And then we're going to move to the top of our head. Lightly tap on the top. You can say any affirming words to yourself. So I'll be repeating some to myself. So I am present in my body. And then we're going to move underneath our eyebrows. I am safe within my body. And then we're going to move to our temples, the sides of our eyes. I am safe within my body. And then we're going to move underneath our eyes, on our eyelids. I am home within my body. And then we're going to go on our Cupid's bow. I am present in my body. Then we're going to move to the crease in the middle of our lips and our chin. I am at home within my body. And then we're going to move underneath our collarbones. I am safe. I am safe. And if you want to, you could do one hand or 2 hands, and then you can give your body a hug. You can see that. And you're going to go underneath your rib cage, and then you lightly tap underneath the rib cage. I am at home within my body. Right? And that's it. I frequently struggle with disassociation, and I use EFT tapping to help me connect back to my body and my breath. And it also allows me to consider my feelings more. So I hope that was helpful to anyone. Thank you all for listening and joining me. I will now pass it back to Shavina. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for that, Ezra. Yeah, that was amazing. I already feel more present in my body. Thank you. Okay. I'm gonna get my screen to share the presentation again. Just give me 1 second. Okay.
All right. Hey, everyone again. And thank you so much, Ezra. I love tapping. I actually do it, like on my own whenever I'm feeling anxious and stressed. So that was, just the perfect transition into this content, which I know can be really stressful to talk about or even think about. But, I think it's important that as members of groups like Cat 9/11, or if you're someone who's thinking about organizing some sort of rapid response group to be out in the community, helping folks in crisis, it is important to think about what to do when you come in contact with police, right? Because anytime that we do crisis response work, there is going to be a risk of coming into contact with the cops. Mental health, social services, housing, these are all places and forums that are entangled with policing. And because these are also intersections of crisis, the chances are high that, if you're doing this kind of rapid response work, that you'll encounter police at some point. And so it's good to be prepared. Because of that, because of the inherent risk in engaging in crisis response work, our recommendation would be that you always try to do this work in teams, well-organized teams within your community. And so that's what Shabina had shared before, kind of the push of this presentation. We're really gearing it towards, groups of folks who want to organize and do this work. Although some of what we're going to share here might be helpful to you, as an individual, or, if you go out more informally in groups of 2 or 3, it could be helpful. But again, that's not the purpose of the training. Also want to share some vocabulary that we're going to use throughout the training. The first thing is I'll be referring to, and Shabina will be referring to, the person in crisis or the person you're helping. They're one and the same. This is the person that, if you are part of a rapid response team, you are, contacted and you show up to kind of respond and provide support to that person. The second vocab word, police liaison. And so a lot of you might have heard this in the context of, protesting and having a police liaison at a protest to talk and de-escalate the police. When there's, big groups of folks present that are organized, around, for example, the Black Lives Matter protests and the Defund the Police protests that happened this summer. We're going to be kind of using it in a similar way in some respects and in a different way in other respects, because, again, the context here is that you are part of a crisis response team. And so a police liaison in this instance would be someone that you might designate to, be the person to talk to police when and if they show up, when you're helping, an individual person who's experiencing some sort of crisis. And then final vocab word, we'll be referring a lot to your partner or your buddy, or talking about crisis response teams. And what we mean is that, we again encourage, because this is an abolitionist training, we keep each other safe. We keep our community safe, not the police. So we encourage you to keep that in mind as you're, thinking about forming some sort of crisis response team, that you always want to make sure that you yourself are keeping you safe, right? So you have a partner or a buddy that you go out into the community with to do rapid response work, that you have a team of people surrounding you and providing support as you do this work, because it can be, again, high risk because of the potential contact with police. Next slide, please. All right, so let's start at the beginning. Before you go out with your crisis response team, what do you want to do? You want to get in touch with them, right? You want to contact them and make a plan. And you want to designate roles for your team. So some suggestions, like I already discussed, would be having someone designated as a police liaison, having like, you know, partner or buddy system. So maybe there's like 6 of you going out as a group into the field, and each of you has a partner or buddy. And then having someone who's on call. And so I'll explain a little bit more about what that means in the next slide. But you should have like someone who is the designated on-call person. And of course, like, you know, there are additional roles that, you know, folks might have. And it just is going to kind of depend on your, you know, individual group, like the needs in your community and the types of, you know, crisis response work you want to do. Because there's a lot of different, you know, like avenues you could go down. And then before you go out, you know, like every time you're, you know, figuring out like when you're going to go out into the community, you want to talk as a group together, whether it's over Zoom because of COVID times, or maybe, you know, it's in person at some point. And you just want to check in with each other about an hour beforehand to address any concerns that anyone might have around going out. So for example, you know, some questions that you might want to ask each other are, what are some factors concerning like your physical, mental, or emotional state that might affect, you know, how you might respond to things happening today when you're out in the community? Check in with each other. Another question you might want to ask is, what role do I feel most equipped, skilled, or comfortable with at this moment in time? And, you know, that can involve things like doing a body assessment, checking in with yourself, grounding, you know, what's your range of mobility today? And then also, you know, like looking around at everybody else in the group. What is everybody's status in the group? What is your, like, what are the privileges that some folks in your group might have and some other folks might not? You know, like who is maybe somebody who, you know, has done police liaison work in the context of a protest before, so has a little more like comfort and experience with that. Maybe that's the person you would want to, you know, designate, or like hopefully that person would volunteer to do that role. And I don't know, Shabina, if you have other things you want to add to this.
Yeah, I think all of those are great points. And I think the more we know the people we respond with, the better we can probably respond. So if we know each other's vulnerabilities, if we know, you know, about each other's status or about each other's health and wellness, like my blood sugar drops a lot, so I may need to carry a snack, or maybe my mate carries that for me. You know, just things, everyday things that may make us work better together as a team when we're out. And also we know that there are just different things that affect our, you know, our ability to access safety depending on our race, our class, how we look, how we present, all of these things. So, you know, taking into consideration that maybe we all don't share the same amount of risk in our own team.
Next slide, please. All right, so continuing to prepare for going out. You know, recommended that you use some sort of shared communication system when you're out in the community. You know, like I'm sure a lot of folks on here are already using Signal. That would be a great example of like an encrypted app that you could use. Maybe walkie-talkies, something like that, because, you know, even though you might be going out for example, a group of 6 people, there might be times where, you know, like if you're on foot, or you're, you know, like on the, you know, you're kind of like walking around the streets or moving around the streets, like you might go around a corner and not be able to visually see each other. So you might want to, you know, like have a way of keeping in touch with each other, even if you're, you know, in different places in the community. Another thing you want to do, and maybe a lot of you have heard this in the protest context, is you want to prepare for the worst. Write the name or the number of a legal support if you have it, if you have an attorney that you know, or most like there are a lot of, you know, like communities that have a chapter of the National Lawyers Guild, which is an organization that provides a lot of grassroots, you know, legal services and legal observation at protests. So if you have, you know, a local National Lawyers Guild chapter, you might want to write their information on your arm, or the name of someone on call. And so kind of going back to the concept of like having a designated team member be on call, you know, this person would be someone who's, you know, stationed like back at home or, you know, back somewhere like where they're kind of, you know, like there to make sure that everything runs smoothly, there to call if you need someone to talk to and ask questions to, there for a quick Google if you have a question, like while you're out there in the community and you can't like, you know, like do it on your phone, like you could give them a call maybe. And they would also be someone who, in the event of, you know, like an arrest or something very serious with the police, like, you know, they would be the person that you could call or that would find out where you are if you've been arrested, for example. So one thing you want to do is make sure that that person knows how to search for arrested individuals in your local community. So what I'm going to do is drop a link in the chat right now, and this is only applicable to LA County, but most of the time, like you can find folks who have been arrested using the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department website. They have a locator, and you just need the person's first and last name and date of birth. So just make sure that your on-call person has that information. And they know the general area that you're going to be in so that, you know, if anything goes down, they can, you know, contact the right precinct or the right police station and get information to make sure that you're safe. Next slide, please.
Before we go to the next slide, I just want to add, depending on when, like often for mass protests and things like that, you may find that the database isn't updated immediately. Sometimes it takes up to 24 hours. Sometimes you'll get a runaround a little bit when you call the sheriff's links and things like that. So it really depends, yeah, on whether there's organized action with a lot of people or if it's like an individual case sometimes.
And I just want to kind of lift up a couple of comments I'm seeing here. First, Olga has shared, this gets tricky for trans folks. Just had a trans friend arrested and many people did not know her dead name, which was used to arrest her because it's her driver's license info. So definitely, you know, it's important to kind of, you know and share the legal name of someone because most likely that's what, you know, police are going to use, and then to like enter information into a database. And then I see that Matt has also brought up that they misspell names a lot too. So you might want to search like a couple of different, you know, configurations, different spellings of somebody's name too, if you can't find them the first time. Okay, so confidentiality considerations. I think, you know, like as we talked about in the last training, that respect and consent are key, just as they are in a setting where, you know, like you are supporting someone who's potentially overdosed on Narcan, like obtaining consent and keeping information confidential is really important when you're in a situation where there's someone in crisis and the police are going to show up. So building relationships, like knowing that you are going out into the community where you might live, where you might work, but a community that you're serving, like with everybody in it who's like connected to you in some way. It's important to know that like in building relationships with people, it's really key to obtain their consent in terms of like providing assistance to them, and then also keeping their information confidential. So with that said, like, it's really important to not disclose any personal information about the person that you're helping to the police unless that person asks you to do so. So if you're in a situation in which, you know, you've started helping someone in crisis and the police show up, it might be that, you know, like the police are asking you for information about what's going on, and it's not, you know, like, it's not your place to share that information. Of course, like, it might be that the person who you're helping says, like, you know what, I want to, they might volunteer information to the police. They might want to share information with the police, and that's their decision, and we have to respect that. But, you know, you always want to make sure that if you are in that situation, that you have really clear guidelines in terms of figuring out like what is okay for you to share and what is not okay. And if it's okay for you to speak to the police on somebody else's behalf, or if that person would prefer to speak to police on their own. Next slide, please. So a couple of don'ts. Do not volunteer information as a means of de-escalation. And I know that like there might be an urge to do this because I think, I mean, I've even experienced this myself, not in a context of interacting with police, but in other contexts, like in my everyday job, where, you know, like someone might be asking me for information and there's kind of like an inherent urge, like, well, maybe if I tell them, you know, some things, they'll go away. If I tell them, you know, like give them some information, like, hey, we're just here, we're a crisis response team, we're helping this person who's having like a mental health episode. And, you know, we've done X, Y, and Z to provide assistance, and, you know, sharing that kind of information, it might be that the police go away. And that's generally not going to be the case. So it's not going to de-escalate. It's probably going to make the police ask for more information, or, you know, continue to just like be present. So just don't do that. Err on the side of less information is more. With that said, never disclose information that could lead the police to believe that someone's committed a crime. So for example, if you're in the community and you are you've been called because there's a person who is overdosing, and the police show up and they say, hey, we got a call that there's somebody who's on drugs and who's, you know, like overdosing. And they ask you like, oh, is this person on drugs? You know, your response can be a lot of different things, but a couple of suggestions is, I've not witnessed any drug use and I don't know. Like, we're just here. You know, my name's Leah. I'm part of this crisis response team. We're here in the community. Somebody called us to help support somebody. We don't know. We're just here to help. And that's like all you have to say. And we'll talk in the next few slides of like alternative things you can say and do. But that's just one example of, you might get in a situation where the police are asking you a question, and the question might lead you to have to disclose like something that could be incriminating to a person who, you know, like you're helping. And just, you know, like, again, be really careful when you're asked a question like that. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about using your rights. So let's say that you're in a situation where somebody has, you know, like you're responding in the community, and the police come and we can go back to the first scenario, the drug use scenario. And the police, you know, like want to search that person for evidence of drugs. And so they ask, you know, the person that you're helping, can I search you? Can we search you? Can we look for drugs? Unfortunately, like, you know, you cannot step in and legally and say, no, you know, for example, let's just say the person's named Sam. No, Sam does not consent to being searched. The ability to consent rests with the person who's being searched. So in an example like that, one thing you can say is, hey, Sam, just to let you know, you have the right, you don't have to consent. You can say, no, I don't consent. If you don't want the police to search you. And so that's kind of like a way to get around it. And then hopefully like Sam, you know, is either like has the decision in their hands at that point to decide whether or not they want to consent, but at least they have that information. Another thing, you know, you want to know is that you don't have to answer any questions the police ask. So in this scenario with Sam, if the police ask, you know, like, hey, is Sam on drugs? You can always say, you know what, like, am I free to go? You know, am I, like, my partner and Sam, are we all free to go? Are we under arrest? And if the police say, no, you're not under arrest, you don't have to say anything else to them. You can walk away. And so, you know, just know that that's always an option. Again, all these different, like, you know, like ways of treating the same situation will really be dependent on kind of like the context you're in and like what's going on around you and what's going on environmentally. But those are just some suggestions for things you can do. Next slide, please. It's good to know, if you can, like what the local laws are in your community. You can bring them up if police try to engage on that issue. So, for example, maybe you're in a park and you're in a public park and there's a curfew law that says, you know, like you can only be in this park until a certain time. And the police show up and the curfew time is 9 p.m. and the police show up at 8:45 and they say, hey, you know, you can't be in this park helping, you know, or you can't be in this park, you have to leave. You know, one response that you can say is, you know what, my understanding is that there's like, we're allowed to be in this park until 9 p.m. It's 8:45. We're here like providing support to, you know, like someone here who needs us. And so, you know, because we don't have to legally leave till 9, we're going to stay here and continue helping this person. You know, that's like one way to communicate like, hey, police, I know what the law is, and, you know, and to kind of assert that. And it's, you know, like it's in a non-confrontational way, right? Like it's not, you know, like you're not saying, even though you might want to, like, F off pigs, get the hell out of here, go eat some donuts or do something better, you know, with yourself. What you're saying is just like, look, I'm here, I have a right to be here, so does the person that I'm helping, and we're not going to leave because there's no reason why we need to leave. So that's like, you know, again, an example of you using your rights. And the last thing I do want to say, even though I've spent, you know, several minutes kind of telling you various examples of how to use your rights in a given situation, in general, we know that the police violate people's rights. So we know that your rights are somewhat of an illusion in any situation. Like the police don't necessarily care if you consent to being searched. They might search you anyway. I think it's important for you to be aware of that because I think it's empowering. I think it, you know, is important if you're in a crisis response team and you are providing, you know, support to somebody that, you know, like if that person doesn't consent to being searched, but the police search them anyway, you are all, you know, your team is there to bear witness to that. You are all like seeing a violation of somebody's rights, and there's like, you know, important things that come from that, which we're kind of going to talk about a little bit later when we get on to documenting and live streaming interactions with police. But I just, like, think it's important for you all to know what your rights are. Next slide, please. So we have a few Know Your Rights guides that we really like. And I'm going to drop links into the chat so that you all can, like, access those and use them as you need. ACLU has a bunch of great Know Your Rights guides. iAmerica has some Know Your Rights guides for people who are undocumented. And then National Lawyers Guild, which I mentioned earlier, also has some good Know Your Rights guides. But encourage, like you all, if you have other good like Instagram accounts or social media where, or like Know Your Rights guides, like please drop them in the chat and share them, because, I know there's a lot of good ones out there, especially, after the uprisings earlier this year. All right. Moving on. So we have, oh, go ahead, Shabina. You got
I know you I think Leah was about to mention that we have a little 5-minute break here. And we'll return maybe at and if people want to continue dropping the guides in the chat or take a real break, feel free to, and we'll see you all in a few. Do maybe stretch, maybe get some water, maybe close your eyes. I know this is a lot of information, so hopefully you take the breaks to actually take a break. We'll go ahead and get back into it. So, okay. We just kind of wanted to preface again and emphasize that CAT 911 is really about abolishing policing, abolishing the prison industrial complex, and building up all of these alternatives and building up solutions. But ultimately right now, while we don't believe in engaging with law enforcement and we would love to just say, don't talk to them at all, period, we still have to be strategic. As Leah mentioned, law enforcement often violate your rights and do whatever they want anyway. So we kind of have to strategize how we are going to protect ourselves, protect people who we're supporting, and ultimately de-escalate situations. And like Leah mentioned earlier, anytime you do crisis response support, there is a high risk of coming into contact with law enforcement, just based on all of the interlocking systems that place law enforcement at the sites of what should be wellness and care. And we also have to develop the skills to safely get ourselves and our communities out of harm's way. So this includes minimal and clear communication as police liaisons. So some of the goals of police de-escalation, so you are trying to ultimately keep the person in crisis as healthy and safe and non-confrontational as possible. And you're also supporting them and your crisis response team from law enforcement officers. And again, if you know the different vulnerabilities of the people that you're supporting and your team, that may influence the approaches you do take in terms of police de-escalation.
All right. So if you know the police are on their way and you have some time, again, it's really important to gauge the consent of the person you're helping, right? And like understand what you're allowed to say, what you're not allowed to say, or if, you know, like you have a role in providing some sort of police liaison assistance in the situation. Because at the end of the day, like the person that you're helping may not want you to intervene or, you know, like be going back and forth between the police and them. They may want to talk to the police directly. And it's, you know, like our job to respect that choice. But, you know, like you want to explain the situation, as much information as you have to the person who's in crisis. So, you know, we just heard that the police are on their way. And, you know, like how would you like to deal with that situation? Would you like us to, you know, talk to the police on your behalf? Or, you know, like what would you prefer? We're happy to do that if you need it. And so even if the police show up and you have no warning, try to prioritize, you know, getting the consent from the person to act as like an advocate or to act as a support in their interaction with police. And because, you know, again, like we're recommending that you do crisis response work in buddies or as partners, you'll want to decide like which one of you, and hopefully this has been pre-decided, right? Like you decided it before you went out. Who's going to stay with the person in crisis and who's going to speak to the officer. Next slide. Cool. So if you are taking on the role of the police liaison, you want to put yourself as a barrier between police and the person in crisis. And there's different ways of being a barrier, right? There is the physical way, right? You physically are in front of the police. You are between the police and the person that you're helping. There's also like verbal, right? Ways of being a barrier. So, you know, like kind of distracting the police away from the person in crisis by having them focus on you because you're asking a lot of questions, you're talking a lot, you know, like you're kind of bringing their attention onto you. You know, like starting off with an introduction is fine. You don't have to give your whole name. You just have to give your first name. Or, you know, like you can just say, hi, I'm Leah. And then you want to explain who you are and what's your purpose. And again, like depending on the situation, this could be more detailed or less detailed, depending on what your comfort level is. So, you know, hi, I'm Leah. I volunteer in the community as a crisis support. You know, like we're here with a couple other folks in the community, just trying to provide help to people who need it, who have contacted us asking. So that's why we're here today. Maybe you want to say, if you're part of like maybe a more formal organization, like the name of that organization. Potentially, like if, you know, it's an organization that the police like might be aware of or know, and there's for some reason you think it might be helpful or useful to share that information, you might want to add that as well. Next slide. All right, and oops, wrong slide. Okay, so what you want to do next is you can tell the police that another thing that you can kind of do to, again, like create that barrier, is you can say to the police, you know, we're helping someone who has had negative experiences in the past with law enforcement. So it would be best if, you know, like to avoid escalating the situation, if you just talk to me instead of talking directly to the person in crisis. And just kind of like frame it as like a statement, like, hey, this is how the communication would be preferred because, again, like this person is not comfortable talking to you directly and they don't want to talk to you. Not saying that this is always going to work in any situation, right? But it's something that you can try to do and see if, you know, the police are like, okay, we're willing to kind of like do this in order to avoid, you know, like, I guess like making the situation like more serious. You also, like, if you can, and I know it's hard, right? But try to stay calm. Look the officer in the eye, keep your hands down and at your sides. We know like what can happen in a situation if, you know, you have your, like, what police decide to escalate if you have your hands in your pockets or like your hands aren't clearly visible, right? So to keep yourself safe, you know, keep your hands down, keep them at your sides. Potentially like the person in crisis, and keep this in mind, if the person in crisis is experiencing another reality, they may feel distrustful of your communications with the police officer as the police liaison. So keep that in mind as well. Just know that, you know, like the way that you are like communicate with the officer, like could, you know, create some tensions in communicating back to the person in crisis. And then, you know, like as we've always said, in a situation in which you're trying to de-escalate, to the extent that you can convey to the police that you believe, even if it's not true, right? Like we know what the truth is. We know that the police inherently come, you know, like places and they make people feel unsafe. But if you can make it seem like you think the police don't want to confront or not looking for a confrontational situation, that might be helpful as well, even if it's not actually a case and even if it's not true. Next slide. Oh, Shabina, you're on mute.
Going back to our crisis support team. So ideally, you know, if one person is taking on the role of police liaison, another person is taking on the role of crisis support and being the direct, you know, communicator with the person in crisis. And this person's role is to keep keep talking to the person in crisis and using de-escalation skills that we've learned in the previous trainings to work through fears that this person may have, but also, you know, to get a little bit more information. Maybe it's about what kind of support is available to them. If they, you know, have a different place they could be, if there's people you could call, if they have their cell phone, you know, just trying to get a little bit more information while also continuing to support as a barrier, as an additional barrier from law enforcement. Also, like Leah mentioned, you know, it's quite possible that you won't be able to get this information, especially if someone is experiencing a type of crisis where they can't communicate a lot of that information to you or don't trust you enough to. But at the same time, you know, using some of the skills from the previous trainings, trying to do your best in terms of just making sure that while the police are present, you don't leave that person's side, and really follow through with your crisis support plan as your team.
All right, so I saw a lot of questions in the chat, or a few questions in the chat about like documenting and live streaming and filming and stuff like that. And so glad to be sharing this part of the presentation. So, you know, like I think that there have been a lot of trainings about, you know, like filming the police or documenting things like police brutality or unlawful arrest. And so just remember that this training is a little bit different because we're talking about the context of like a crisis support team or crisis response team. So there might be some different considerations. And, you know, like we think that in terms of, you know, crisis response work, you would want to use documenting and live streaming and filming for the purposes of, mitigating violence, like decreasing the violence that police might inflict on, like you or your support team or the person that you're helping, holding police accountable. Also, like from that legalistic perspective, anything that you get as a like witness or bystander is going to be evidence, for the person in crisis or like the victim of police brutality for any sort of later civil or criminal case. So, it's important to have, that like sort of evidence or documentation. And then finally, like, and to me, this is the most important one, bearing witness. In my work and in my practice, like I can't tell you like how many people that I've worked with who, have just told me like the fact that I was present, that I was there, that I witnessed something and that I validated their perspective, that was like very meaningful. So, I think that that's like a really important role that, you're documenting and you're, like filming could play in a situation like this because, what you're doing is you're telling like the person in crisis, like, you know what, I saw what happened and what you're saying is exactly true. Because it's all too often that, like the police in our society are given the benefit of the doubt, right? So to have that perspective, that truthful perspective from you is really important. With that said, if you decide you want to, like document or film or something, you want to do so with some caution and with some consideration. Next slide, please. Just know that taking photos and videos could cut both ways, right? So, just like I said, and just like many of you probably know from, trainings or like infographics or resources around protests, a lot of times they recommend that you blur people's faces out or you don't share widely on social media. And I think it's kind of for the same reasons that you would think twice about taking a photo or a video in this situation, because it could, like be used against the person that you're helping. It could, like there could be something incriminating in your photo or video that could be used to perhaps like prosecute someone in crisis, right? So you just want to make sure that you take that into consideration before you decide to, like take a photo or take a video. You also want to, again, like going back to confidentiality, consider the confidentiality of the person that you're helping. Like if, you've been talking to the person that you're helping and, that they're like very uncomfortable, maybe like, and don't want like people to know like that they're in crisis or that, they've needed this type of support. It might, it might be a consideration that you want to take into account when deciding like whether to film something happening, especially like, I know there's also an urge, right, to share stuff on social media. And it's like, of course, before doing anything, if you decide to take a photo or video, you should always, always, always ask, the person that you took the video of, like what they want to do with that video. Do they want you to share it on social media? Maybe they do. Do they want, to have it for themselves and then have them, and then they have the ability to decide what to do with it? Do they, like want you to destroy it? It's up to them ultimately. And so, that's a good question to kind of ask when you're deciding whether or not to do this. And even if you decide to do it, it's a good question to ask after the fact if you took it before talking to that person. Again, like just like when we talked about before you go out into the field, you just want to make sure that if you didn't have that information already, the person you're helping full name and date of birth to locate them if they're arrested, If they're in the midst of getting arrested, you can have them like shout their information to you, you know, but make sure you get that and you can tell them like, hey, we're gonna, you know, look you up. We're gonna figure out where you're at, and we're gonna, you know, do our best to like kind of track where you're going, so that, you know, we can continue to support you. Best practice, remember that you're a witness. So anything you see is, you know, like it's significant and important. So when you go home afterwards, if you go home afterwards, you want to sit down and you want to write down your recollections, right? What did you see? Use all your senses. Like, what did you hear? If you can get the badge numbers and the names of the officers that were present, you should do that. And you can also look at their uniforms, right, to identify like what police agency they were from. But you should, you know, like if you decide not to take photos or videos, then you would want to very soon after you have that interaction with police, sit down in front of a piece of paper and like write down as much as you remember, because it could be really important later. And then, you know, after any incident, if the police show up and then they commit acts of violence and they leave, but they don't arrest anyone, you know, you want to take photos of any injuries. You obviously would want, like, if you need to seek medical attention or the person that you're helping needs to seek medical attention, you want to make sure that, you know, like, you perhaps accompany them, and you tell them, hey, any medical bills, any, like, you know, paperwork you get from the doctor that documents what your injuries are, keep that. It's really important. Next slide, please.
And before we go to the next slide, I just want to highlight a couple comments. Someone said, I've heard multiple times to never video the people being criminalized and to only video the cops. Do you have a take on that, Leah?
Yeah, I think that that's like, you know, like a good way to kind of lean towards. Like, I think I would lean towards not filming and not videoing, you know, the person, you know, like who's the victim of police brutality necessarily. But at the same time, I know that there are some cases in which it happens, right? Like where you're like filming this whole thing to give context to the situation. So I think it's really highly dependent on what the situation is, what the level of risk is. The other thing is that I want to put out there for consideration is if it does turn into some sort of criminal case, like if, you know, the person that you're helping gets arrested and the police know that you filmed it, they might be able to, you know, subpoena that your phone or, you know, like the photos that you took and use that as evidence. So like, I guess, again, like, from the lawyer perspective, I would say don't do this, but I know that, you know, there are people that might do this anyway. And so if you do, just know what the risks are. I hope that answers the question.
And one more comment, someone said you can also narrate what you see happening in a more general cop watch situation as you are taping. That has been effective for overturning some ICE detentions. Just thought that was a good idea to share. It's just, you know, sometimes you may not be video recording necessarily, but you may be audio recording and narrating on your phone in that way.
That's a great suggestion, definitely.
So looks like other people are adding some more really helpful tips in the chat. And I think those will be recorded in our crowdsourced document too. And right now we're switching over into our guiding questions and risk assessment document. I know there have been a lot of issues in terms of emailing things out. So many people have been interested, like over 500 people have been interested in this training, which I think is amazing. Like that idea alone is just so amazing and powerful to me, because I remember sitting at Chico's Justice Center like 6-7 years ago, and there were 5 of us in a room. So to think about, yeah, over 500 people getting on the internet, yeah, it's just amazing. And also it creates some logistical issues where sometimes we aren't able to email out large files or PDFs to that many people. So if you didn't get it, hopefully it'll be shared again in the chat. It looks like it's being shared, which is awesome. Thank you all. And I wanted to give a little bit more of a sort of like a heads up about this document. It's not necessarily like a set of tools that you should follow, or like a 1 to 5 that works for every situation or something like that. It's more a general way to think about situations to assess risk. And also we're hoping you'll use these questions in your breakout rooms and scenarios. And Leah and I will do a little demo, but essentially we want to use these questions to either generate more questions or just to get you know, an understanding of like, how much do we know, how much don't we know, and you know, what are we working with, and what are the different ways that we can assess risk in response. So I'll start with number 1. So consider spatial and body awareness. So in thinking about this, we were, you know, we thought, how might the location, time of day, or environment affect your responses, and also how you might be feeling in the moment. So again, our training is about, you know, responding in teams and responding in organized response like settings, but you know, these things change depending on the situation you encounter, and also just change because we just all have different needs and traumas and things that come up even in the moment of you know, a response situation. So Leah, do you, I guess I can give like an example or two also. So the same way that you might not want to, if you're being pulled over by a cop on the freeway and it's late at night, it's dark, you may want to wait till you get to a well-lit area, or depending on the time of day, you may have more you may have more or less visibility in responding. And depending on your environment, you know, sometimes it may help if you're responding to a situation where there's construction going on, there's a lot of loud noises and things like that, that might interfere with your choices or decisions that you make as a team when you are de-escalating.
Yeah, and so moving on to question number 2, what do I know? And this question is really designed as a way for if you're in a situation where the police show up and it's like it's obviously a high stress situation, like hopefully, you know, asking yourself, what do I know, is kind of like a way of grounding yourself and a way of kind of like calming yourself and orienting yourself to the situation. Knowing, like, you know, asking yourself, what do I know, is going to help you when you're starting the risk assessment. You know, this question is very straightforward. There's no hiding the ball. It's literally like, what are your senses and your observations telling you? And, you know, this will get you to farther along the risk assessment to the answer to answer questions like, what do I know about the person that I'm helping, and what do I know that will get us out of the situation? And so then similar to that, and maybe we need to go to the next slide, Shabina, because I think, yeah, question 3. So question 3 is there anything that I wish I knew more about? And, you know, like that's, again, going to be a question that once you kind of have decided what you know, you'll want to take the next step to say, like, what don't I know? What in this situation, like, do I wish I know, or do I wish I knew, so that I could, you know, decide, you know, how high the risk is in terms of making a decision. And I know this is, and I just want to acknowledge that these questions are really abstract, but on the next slide, we're going to do a scenario where we apply it. So hopefully that'll make it a little more clear.
Yeah. And I also want to acknowledge that some of the what are the risk questions are actually from Vision Change Win, who have been supporting Cat 911 through digital security trainings that we've been attending, and also have an amazing like a toolkit, get information on their website, and these series of questions have come from their work. So again, like Leah mentioned, these questions kind of broad and abstract, but they're more of a way to just like, help us think about what we might want to consider. And so some of their questions are, who do I need to protect? How likely is it that I will need to protect them? How bad are the consequences if I can't protect them? And how much trouble am I willing to go through to prevent these negative consequences? I think we'll just apply it to the scenario in the next slide, so that you can sort of see what we mean when we ask these questions. And the last one is what or how do I respond? So that'll again get addressed in the scenario here. So I'll go ahead and read this out loud. Police arrive while you are helping a young person having a mental health crisis on the street in broad daylight in front of an apartment building. The young person has told you their name is John. The police ask you, who are you? You tell them your first name and that you're a crisis support worker working with John. Your buddy is sitting with John on the sidewalk as you are interfacing with the police. The police suddenly say to your friend and John, you can't sit there. You need to get off the sidewalk right now, and step towards them in a threatening manner. So using some of our risk assessment and guiding question tools, we can jump kind of right into a little bit of, we might skip over like how we're feeling right now, just because we're not there. You know, this would be different if we were actually at the scene, and we would be able to gather a lot of the information about the environment, and we have some information that we're working with, like it's broad daylight, it's probably in the middle of the day, and we have a little bit of a location in front of an apartment building, might be in a residential area, and things like that. But maybe, Leah, do you want to go through what do I know?
Yeah, sure. So what do I know from this scenario? And of course, you know, again, like this is a very 1D scenario. There's a lot more that you're probably going to know, but it's just like helpful to kind of walk through this and, you know, like just so that you can kind of practice it in your breakout rooms, and then you'll, you know, like hopefully practice it when you're out with your crisis support teams. So things I know, I'm helping a young person. They're having a mental health crisis. It's on the street. We're in broad daylight. We're in front of an apartment building. I'm helping someone whose name is John. And John and my buddy are sitting on the sidewalk, and I'm the one who's talking with police. So I am probably the police liaison. So that's what I know.
Great.
Do you want to take the next question?
Sure, yeah. So is there anything I wish I knew more about? So I wish I knew whether, I wish I knew what John needed in terms of the health crisis that they were facing. I also wish I knew a little bit about John's mobility. The police are saying you can't sit there. Can John move from where they're sitting? I would want to know, whether John lived in that building, and also whether John had some other people that knew them that could show up to the scene or help support. I want to know a lot more about what John was actually experiencing, and just the type of de-escalation that John might need. I want to know if they would give me consent to ask to have this information, and for my buddy to be an advocate for them. Any other things?
Yeah, like I think, one thing that pops into my head about what I would want to know is, the police are saying to my buddy and John that they're not allowed to sit there. You need to get off the sidewalk right now. So, like what I'd be wondering is what's the local law? Because I know that, obviously in LA, we do have certain laws against sitting, lying, or sleeping on the sidewalk. But maybe, you're in a place where that law doesn't exist. I know it's very unlikely, but I would want to know, what's the law here? And did you already mention, Shabina, about mobility and access?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, wondering if John can move from the sidewalk or where they're sitting, what is their range of mobility right now? Given that the police are stepping towards them in such a threatening manner, and demanding that they move.
Mm-hmm.
And just to briefly go through some of the risks. So who do I need to protect? How likely is it that I need to protect them? Well, protect or supporting. In this case, we want to support John. We also want to support ourselves because the police are present, and they're such a violent force. We also, how likely is it that we'll need to protect them? Probably pretty likely. They're already using escalation. How bad are the consequences if I can't protect them? It's unclear. It's hard to say. It could lead to harm, further violence. It could lead to arrest. It could lead to possibly more. So the consequences could potentially be pretty awful. How much trouble am I willing to go through to prevent those negative consequences? I think because I'm here at the scene and I have a buddy and it's broad daylight and it seems like I have learned a set of de-escalation tools, and I feel a little bit equipped. I think I would definitely spend quite a bit of energy and time trying to make sure these negative consequences didn't occur.
We have another clarifying question about the law on sidewalks. I understand some were found to be unconstitutional.
Yes. It really depends. Oh, go ahead. I see somebody speaking.
I'm happy to comment on this as a representative of Streetwatch LA. The Constitution, in the case Martin v. Boise, it was declared that sit, sleep, lie laws are unconstitutional. There have been attempts in LA to create a sit, sleep, lie ordinance, but most recently, it was struck down. Well, it wasn't necessarily struck down, but City Council refused to vote on it. With that said, the police still arrest people who are in the public way pretty routinely. There's not really any consistency on this. But yes, the 4118 is the specific LA ordinance.
And just also want to say that, you know, that, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, but I think that the court case was there, but it was found to be an Eighth Amendment violation, my understanding. If there's not enough shelters, you can't arrest people for being on the sidewalk. But that being said, the police often arrest you for things they can't arrest you for, and then you go to jail for not making a court date, even if the underlying offense would have been thrown out.
Yeah, and the other thing I just wanted to point out, and thank you everyone for you know, like sharing this information, is that, you know, like some of these court cases only apply to certain areas of the United States because we have like this complex system of courts. So like if it's a Ninth Circuit court case, it's only going to apply to like California, Hawaii, and a few other states. And stuff like that. So it's important, and I know that there are people here that aren't just from LA. So for folks who are not in LA, you know, like it's good to, you know, research again, like these type of local laws, because police love to enforce them, especially against, you know, like unhoused folks. So like, you know, local laws around curfews, you know, sleeping, sitting line on the sidewalk, you know, like a transit violation, lots of different things.
And one more thing before we move into our scenarios, there were other comments above about having to give law enforcement your real first name or the name on your ID, or yeah, if you can use a nickname.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, you're asking. So like, I saw some of the communication in the chat, and in general, like I've had clients, and that's why I'm speaking from this experience, who have given police a different name, and then the police like search their stuff illegally or arrest them and find out that they gave the police a false name, and that's an additional charge that's added. And I know that somebody, you know, mentioned that this is, you know, like a really difficult question if you're trans. And I think that's right. It is a really difficult question. And I, you know, like I definitely am not an expert in how to kind of navigate that situation. And if somebody wanted to kind of share, you know, like if they have kind of like an understanding of the best way to answer that question, you know, like I would say just generally, like you should tell them the name that is your name, that regardless of like it's your dead name or, you know, like the name that you've chosen. But I know that, you know, like that obviously could lead to legal repercussions. And so definitely invite like folks to kind of chime in and share what they think. And I see Isaac's raising their hand.
Isaac, just before you go, I just want to say we have MT and Ziggy on stack. So Isaac, then MT, then Ziggy.
Oh, I was just going to say that those folks are on stack. So MT, if you want to go.
Okay, thank you, y'all. I'll make it really quick. I just want to really drive home the point that if you live inside a body that is under this hierarchy that we're trying to get out from the subjugation of, if you exist in a body that is likely to be criminalized or is otherwise made intentionally vulnerable, they can do anything they want. They don't need a reason, and they will do anything they want. They will search your stuff without your consent completely illegally. They will find evidence against you completely illegally. They will detain you completely illegally. They will do what if they think that no one is coming for you and you don't have any money or any resources, you're done for. So that's why this training is so important, and that's why Cat 911 is so important, is because, you know, when you're, and I live houselessly. I've encountered so much crap I can't even tell you. You know, but the barrier to that is numbers and solidarity. So thank you for having this training. Thank you for letting me speak.
I have Ziggy on stack.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say something similar, except that like what, similar, like what has helped me in the past is like being in very public spaces, and I don't know if it would be a good idea, like in those situations, like, because sometimes in the past it has been a good idea, and sometimes in the past it has just escalated it further, is if I like say very clearly and very loudly so that other people start paying attention, I do not consent to the search. I do not consent to these questions. I do not consent to blah, blah, blah. That was a question. I'm like, is that a good thing for me to be doing? Or is that a bad thing for me to be doing?
It's a hard question to answer because I think, like the acknowledgement, and I want to thank MT for sharing their experience, because I think it's right. Like even, and I think, I kind of pointed to this early in the training, even if you say like, I don't consent, or even if you say like, am I free to leave? The police like will still violate your rights, and they'll still, like search your stuff without your consent. And so it's hard for me to have like a answer in that situation for you for what is best, because I honestly, like, I don't know. And it's like, this is a legal gray area that, like is complicated, and it varies, like it's going to vary with like the individual situation. But I would say like, if it's something that you've been doing and it's been working, I would say to keep doing it.
It works like sometimes.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
And I'm sorry I don't have a better answer. The law is not, obviously, like the law is, not a perfect thing. And quite often the way that it's applied is unjust and unfair, right? It's one of these systems that we're here today, like talking about as an example of something that, is destructive and like it's not applied equitably, it's not applied fairly. I'm sorry, I don't have the words. This is so hard, but like, it's so hard to say, like, I don't know the answer. And I'm sorry. But I don't have a definitive, like, this is what you can do in every situation that works.
I also want to echo, thank you so much for sharing. And I think like just us bringing up these situations we might encounter, or lingering thoughts, or just like hearing from other people is so important. And I think I want to emphasize it again that it is about building up community power and community health and community response, and figuring out how we can like create a culture of helping support each other and changing our relationships to one another. Because yeah, it's true, law enforcement is a rogue force. They do what they want. They don't unpredictable, and we we just mostly have each other and our experiences to go off of. Yeah. How do people feel like they're want to spend some time in breakout rooms and go through some scenarios together. Don't feel pressured to necessarily focus just on your scenario. I know we just went, there were a lot of really important questions that were raised. So I encourage people to also just like get to know each other's experiences in your breakout rooms. I know there haven't been that many opportunities for people to get to know each other and talk also. So I want to just set this up for people so that we can break apart into smaller groups and then come back together again. So I believe the questions and scenarios have been shared in the chat. If each group can designate a spokesperson to share back to the larger group, that would be great. And each breakout group should have an assigned facilitator. And that facilitator's role is just to help the group navigate the activity and make sure everyone gets a chance to share mostly. If your group doesn't have a facilitator, we apologize. And if anyone wants to take on that role in your group, that would be amazing. Are there any things that people want to add before we move on to the next step? Okay. So these are the 3 scenarios. We know that they're very vague. There isn't very much detail. And also, I want to remind people that there is a wellness room that you can access if you send a direct message to CAT 911 in the chat. These situations might be something you live through. You might have witnessed this. And so I don't want to just kind of move forward without acknowledging that these are actual real life situations that may be very intimate to you and your lives and your loved ones. So they are listed here and will in the chat, and hopefully your facilitator will help hold a conversation where you can choose one of the scenarios. Leah, do you think we need to read them out loud, or can people read them in their breakout room?
Yeah, I guess like we can have folks read them out loud in the breakout room.
So we'll have about, I think we'll have about 15 minutes to break out, and then we'll meet back in the main room. Does that sound good?
Can I do it now?
Yeah.
necessarily have enough. Oh, kicked out. Okay.
I also just, it was amazing to take a second and just like hear from people about where they're at in terms of their habitat or geography, and also just what they're up to and thinking about. And there are so many people that are part of this training that are doing amazing things wherever they're at, whether it's figuring out how to abolish the police wherever they are, or setting up mutual aid practices. And there's just so many things that people are doing that are interconnected, and so many like just amazing things that people have shared that yeah, I'm blown away. So maybe, I know we're kind of running a little behind on time. So maybe very briefly, if we could have a few people share and about their breakout session, and then we'll just go into a little bit of an evaluation for this training if people want to give some direct feedback. Does anybody want to tell us which scenario your group chose, and how your group engaged or didn't engage with the questions, and how your team responded?
Before we go ahead, we have a question. As things escalate and violence is occurring, such as scenario 1 and 3, what are some strategies to protect folks' bodies? Like, what positions do you go in? Do you protect the neck, the stomach?
Do folks on the call have some ideas about that question?
If I may, hi, y'all, Shannon. I'm also one of the facilitators. And in our group, we kind of broke the rules and didn't talk about one of the scenarios, but instead talked about something that happened to myself and my mutual aid buddy partner a couple weeks ago in front of Mayor Garcetti's home. Several of us were beaten with batons when we were, sorry, trigger warning. I mean, all of this is triggering. That's too late. Several of us were beaten with batons by the police when we interceded, putting our bodies between them and the BLM LA leadership and the youth vanguard, the kids who are on the front line. One of my friends who was more severely injured was protecting the neck of someone in front of her, which seriously helped that person, but also left my friend exposed, and she was hit in the back of the head with a baton. In my situation, there was a person, a larger Black man, who had been thrown to the ground, and another police officer was coming at his head with a baton. So I stepped in the way thinking that the officer wouldn't hit me. He did, and then he held on to me and hit me a couple more times. However, because I was able to kind of shield myself with my back and shield this individual, the officers eventually stopped hitting and de-escalated to the point where like they lined up, we lined up, everyone left. So on the one hand, yeah, you can use your body to protect people, and also that is sometimes comes with serious risk and trauma, and just like to be careful in making those calculations based on your own health, well-being, points of privilege, and what you think you can do to support those around you.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Shannon, for sharing that. That sounds horrible, and I'm sad. I'm like, yeah, you shouldn't have gone through that. No one should have to go through that. Yeah, and it's just like, I know we make up these scenarios, but we don't even have to, because yeah, they happen every day, all the time.
We have 2 participants that raise their hand, Ziggy and AMJ.
Go ahead. Was Ziggy, sorry, I like can't really see the chat. So whoever is first.
I don't know who was first. MJ, you can go first.
Okay. Which works out because I was in Shannon's group and I was gonna like make it mostly, as anonymous as possible. But one of the things that we talked about, like we were very much at a loss in terms of like what to do in this situation, except like remembering, excuse me, well, okay, unexpected, excuse me. Knowing what risks you're willing to take, able to take based on your physical ability, legal status, etc., and any plans that may be in place, and the importance of having plans in place. It's something we are learning through the Vision Change Win Security School. And I'm going to paste that resource in the chat. It will go into the crowdsource document as well. But the other thing that I thought about was the fact that we are frequently just reacting in the moment because we're people, and react is what we do: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, right? And so, having healers among ourselves in our groups who can, like share Reiki for grounding purposes, having, if you're into like prayer warriors, people who are praying for safety and for grounding, or whatever practices we need spiritually, that we welcome spiritually, that can help us as community, might be something that's good. Maybe it keeps the cops away, maybe it doesn't, but what can we do to fortify ourselves as teams to lessen the intensity of any interactions with cops might be something to consider. But planning and having supports.
Definitely. I couldn't agree with that more.
And Ziggy?
Hi. Yeah, I was gonna say something similar, like a really good thing to know, like especially if you go out. The context we have is if you go out with a team that you already know ahead of time, so know what risks people are willing and able to take. If there are people who are like myself, like physically and mentally disabled, maybe they should be taking different risks than people who aren't. If like myself, you've experienced head trauma, maybe you should not be the first person who's going to be putting their body in a place where you're gonna get hit in the head, or so you just got to talk amongst each other and be like, hey, what greater vulnerabilities does each of us have, and what risks are each of us willing to take? Because it's a responsibility thing as well as a practicability thing, right? So like, in addition to me not wanting to put myself in certain situations, I don't want to put other people in certain situations. And if I know that someone else is going to be at greater risk in that situation than I am, then it's fucked up in this stupid world that we live in, but like I don't really have another option besides putting myself in that position instead, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Ziggy, for articulating that. Yeah, I think you said it beautifully, and I think like you're right. I think we all have so much to consider, and I saw in the chat people are saying organize, and yeah, I think it really makes sense what you said, to come back to kind of really having those conversations, really communicating, really getting to know the people that we're building with. I know. Okay, so I'm getting some notes about the time, and I think what we can do is maybe hear from one more person, and then we can go into the eval, and we'll just we'll wrap it up with a closing.
We have someone on stack, Audrey.
Hi, Audrey, they, them. I think one of the things from scenario 2 that we talked about that I just wanted to share was, that's the one at the party and the police are called, is that our group also talked about letting everyone else at the party know that the police are coming. So that even as you're navigating the crisis of the overdose, also minimizing the risk for everyone else who's at the party. So they know to like hide, leave, or whatever if they need to. And then we were also, I think we're kind of joking, but we're like, if we had more capacity, we would like also talk to the person like, hey, why did you call the cops? And or like have them be the one to meet the police at the front so that they're like, you brought them here, like it's partially your responsibility to de-escalate. But even in any scenario, thinking about like, what are the other ways that people might be impacted by what's happening? And that's it. Check.
Thank you so much, Audrey. That's a huge point. Yeah, I think I can't emphasize communication enough. And yeah, having transparency around, especially when, police may be present with the people that you want to support. So we do have this little evaluation activity. If people can't stay and go through it, feel free to email us any feedback that you might want to share with us. This was just going to be a brief activity where you could throw your answers in the chat. Some things you liked, some things that could be changed or different for another training. And then this little character guy or person-ish figure is something that I have borrowed from workshops with critical resistance. And usually we name something that you learned, something that you feel, and an actionable step or something you're walking away with. I know this is like a very involved feedback activity. So if people can stay and give some feedback, that would be great. And if you cannot, I just want to say thank you again to every single person that took the time to be with us today, to put any effort towards building this training or workshop series, for interpreting, for translating, for closed captioning, for music, for helping navigate the chat, for all of it. Appreciate every single person, and sounds like people are doing amazing work out there. And I'm going to pass it to Leah in case you want to say anything else before people give us feedback.
Yeah, just really quick, want to thank everybody for attending and everybody who facilitated and did the music and helped us put together these trainings, the interpreters, just a really amazing space to be a part of. Really honored to be here with you all. I love every conversation that was going on in the chat. I learned a lot today and thought a lot about things, and got some different perspectives. And I just really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. Maybe we have one more minute. If people want to drop any feedback in the chat, we'll put it on our crowdsource doc. And if not, email cat911 at gmail. Wait, is that right? cat911 at gmail.com. cat911team at gmail.com. Oh, you all are so kind.
Thank you.
Yes to hydrating and grounding.
Yeah, I've got my huge water bottle right here.
Amazing. Okay. Cool. All right, everyone. I think this wraps it up. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you all. I know. I wish there was a dance party after this. Cool. Yes. Crowdsource doc for feedback. Leftover thoughts. Good night, everybody. Or good evening.
Yeah, bye everyone. Thank you so much. Get some rest.